replacing the front brake pads in this 2012 F-150. To prep the vehicle, I have wheel chocks behind the rear tires. I've set the parking brake, and I have raised the wheel that we will be working on just a little bit off the ground and supported that with a safety stand. If we take a look at our wheel assembly, we can see our rotor. Around the rotor, we have our brake caliper. Inside the brake caliper, we have our brake pads. And that caliper is held on by our caliper bracket. Taking a look from the side, we can get a little better vantage point of our caliper. We will need to remove the caliper to gain access to the brake pads. And taking a look from behind, we can see two caliper bolts. These bolts need to be removed for us to be able to remove the caliper. I also want to make note of my bleed screw, as we will need to loosen this prior to taking the caliper off. I want to lubricate the caliper bolts with Amsoil metal protector. This will act as a penetrating oil and aid in the removal of those bolts. And additionally, I will be lubricating that bleed screw with Amsoil metal protector as well. And with that bleed screw, I'm going to insert the back shank of a 1/8 inch drill bit into the hole of that bleed screw. So as I loosen this with a 3/8 inch combination wrench, it will reduce the chance that the bleed screw will get crushed or kinked or break off. And I just want to loosen this a little bit and then tighten it back up. Now I'm using a rubber mallet to gently give it a little bit of persuasion to help that bleed screw come out. It is in there pretty good. I assume if the drill bit wasn't in there, it might just snap off. And we got that fluid coming out there. And then we can loosen our two caliper bolts. These are probably 13 millimeter bolts, but my 1/2 inch combination wrench just fits a little bit better. And then using a large standard head screwdriver as a pry bar, we can gently work that caliper off. And then I'll support that caliper with a couple bungee cords to reduce unnecessary pressure on the brake line. With that caliper gone, we can clearly see our brake pads. We should be able to then slip those brake pads off of the rotor. And what we are left with is our caliper mounting bracket. And taking another look from behind, we can see that caliper mounting bracket. That is held on by two bolts, which we need to remove. I'm going to again spray Amsoil metal protector to act as a penetrating oil to help in the removal process. And a breaker bar should aid in the removal of those bolts. And we can then remove those bolts. And just be aware that when you pull that second bolt, that bracket will fall off. And I'll be applying a little Amsoil metal protector to the wheel hub and each of the studs, just to aid in the removal process of the rotor. And that one was on there pretty good. Taking a look inside of the caliper, we can see our two pistons. Around the pistons, we have a dust boot. And then we have our caliper housing for those pistons. If the dust boots and pistons look to be in good condition, we can reset the pistons without needing to replace the caliper. To reset the piston, we first want to open the bleed screw. To reset the piston, I'm going to place an old brake pad up against the caliper pistons. I'm then going to be using a brake caliper press tool to reset those pistons. And then I can close that bleed screw. Because our old caliper was still in good condition, we are going to be prepping the brackets for reinstallation. We need to locate our brake hardware. There are 4 pieces. And using a standard head screwdriver, we can work that brake hardware off. And after removing the hardware, we can remove our caliper pins and boots. And we have our replacement components to put on next. To prep our bracket for the new hardware, I will be using a little bit of Amsoil brake and parts cleaner with a wire brush and clean off the mating surface for where that new hardware will sit. And we want to do this for each of those 4 seat locations. We can then clean the caliper pins, making sure to remove the old grease, followed by our new brake parts lubricant. Want to make sure we coat the entire caliper pin. We'll coat the inside of the boot as well. And boot on our pin and pin in our bracket. And we want to work the air out of that boot. And that process will be completed for the other side as well. Additionally, the location for our brake parts hardware will have just a little bit of brake parts lubricant applied to it. This will help prevent rust or corrosion in the future and possibly reduce any chance that it might squeak. And that is followed by the installation of the brake hardware component. Now we do want to make sure that the larger tab is facing out and that smaller tab is facing inward. And with that completed, our bracket is ready to be reinstalled onto the vehicle. Taking a look at our old rotor, it does feel like it is in good condition. There are no major grooves or scoring in the rotor. My rotor measures at about 1.310, which is above our discard thickness. So in theory, we could take this to the auto parts store and have them resurface the rotors and save a little bit of money from purchasing a brand new one. This service was not currently available, so we will be replacing the existing rotor with a brand new rotor. Taking a look at our new brake pads, we can see that one of them has 2 additional tabs. This particular pad goes on the inside, so when we get ready to install those, we'll need to double check that. To prep my wheel hub, I will be using Amsoil brake and parts cleaner and a wire brush to clean off the corrosion and rust. And my goal is to get this as clean as possible. And when everything is as clean as I can get it, and the brake parts cleaner has dried, I'm going to coat the surface of the wheel hub as well as my rear shroud with Amsoil heavy-duty metal protector. This is essentially an undercoat that does not attract dust. It will help with the removal of the wheel in the future, as well as prevent rust and corrosion from occurring. And whether you had your old rotor resurfaced or you purchased a new rotor, you do want to clean the surface with Amsoil brake and parts cleaner, as there is debris and or oil that it was packaged in. We want to make sure that it is perfectly clean before we reassemble that. And installing one of the lug nuts will help keep that in place while we reassemble the rest of the components. With our old caliper bracket mounting bolts, we want to clean up the threads with a little bit of Amsoil brake and parts cleaner. And then we're going to add just a little bit of Permatex thread locker. And we can install that bracket and start those bolts. And those bolts will then be torqued to 184 foot-pounds. After torquing our bracket, we can install our new pads, making sure that the pad with the two protrusions is towards the inside of the vehicle. We can then reinstall the caliper and start our bolts. And with a 1/2 inch socket, I will tighten that to 27 foot-pounds. To bleed the brakes, I will be using a brake bleed tool. There are various ways to do this. You can do it manually, you can use a tool as such or otherwise, but we want to make sure that any air is out of the brake lines. Prior to test driving the vehicle, we want to press the brake pedal a few times until it firms up. We also want to top off the brake fluid reservoir up to the max level. And then we can take it for a test drive.